Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the Robert W. Reader, the first series, a special speaker series that we've been doing this year called History Happened Here, where we're focusing on bringing in guest speakers who can share with us their expertise on important elements of local history. And so this afternoon, I'm very excited to welcome Bill Lawson, who, besides being the executive director of Mahoning Valley Historical Society, is a proud YSU alum of the YSU history program, both his bachelor's and master's degree. So thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to learning about local history in the news.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kluper, and I'm very happy to be here. And as you mentioned, yes, I am a very proud graduate of Youngstown State University's history program. And what I want to do today is expound upon this title that we came up with, Local History in the News. And that's kind of a catchphrase, but what it's really about is how much radio and television broadcasting media influenced 20th century history here in the Mahoning Valley, or either influenced it or actually recorded it happening, and why that's important, and how Mahoning Valley Historical Society preserves that part of our history and those media through a program we've been developing now. Actually, we've been involved along with YSU and Williamson family for over 27 years now. But before I get into the topic a little deeper, I just want to do my obligatory infomercial about Mahoning Valley Historical Society. And so Mahoning Valley Historical Society was founded September 10th, 1875 in Youngstown. And our mission is very succinct, and you see it right there in one sentence. We collect, preserve, and teach the history of the people of Mahoning Valley. We are a membership organization, as are most historical societies, more than 600 individuals and families, and about 46 local companies, an important repository of historical materials from this region. And we literally have hundreds of thousands of objects and documents in our collection. And that is a great benefit to us and the community, but it's also, in terms of resources, how we spend the majority of our funds every year is maintaining and getting into and processing and doing things with that collection. The other side of the equation is we're an educational institution providing programs and events and interactions through the World Wide Web and social media, over 28,000 people of all ages and backgrounds on an annual basis. And our facilities here in Youngstown have, some are very well known. Arms Family Museum of Local History is right here on the edge of YSU's campus. And we have the original Olive and Wilford Arms House, a beautiful 1905 arts and crafts style mansion that was part of the Wick Avenue neighborhood. And behind is the original carriage house, or automobile barn as it was called, where service building on the property, which was renovated in the early 1980s into an archive center, which we'll talk a little more about that later. And more recently, we've expanded our, go back to the mission here. At Arms Family Museum, we have on the second floor and lower level exhibits featuring our decorative arts collection, which is very extensive. And this museum provides a good backdrop for that part of our collections. And then we have a very in-depth personal interpretation of the arts and crafts movements and the Arms family through this house that Mr. and Mrs. Arms built in the early 20th century. And we are actively preserving the house, the automobile barn, carriage house, and also we're working on plans to bring back a lot of landscape elements that either need help or have disappeared. More recently, and by that I mean within the last 10 years, we have developed Tyler Mahoning Valley History Center in downtown Youngstown, And we call it a history themed community center, which has a lot going on, including on the first floor, the folk exhibit gallery installation, the people of the Mahoning Valley, which is a very broad but very good look at what people have done here from prehistoric times up to the present. We have another gallery, the Youngstown Foundation Community History Gallery, which we do local traveling exhibits, local working in partnerships with other organizations and collectors. We have a original ballroom to the building going back to 1921, which is available for events both for our organization and others and families and businesses. And we created a new archive center there for the ever expanding Mahoning Valley Historical Society archives. And then the top floor is the Ann Kilpally Christman Education Center. And so that's what's going on there, but it's also, like Arms County Museum, a very significant landmark, both locally and nationally, because of its connection to Good Humor brand of ice cream suckers, which is still an active brand here and was a cultural icon of the 20th century, and it all started in downtown Youngstown. So I mentioned what's going on, and at this point I want to talk about this gentleman, Warren P. Williamson Jr., who is from a pioneering family here in Youngstown, and he himself in the 20th century was a pioneer in first radio and then television broadcasting. And before we go any further with slides, I wanted to review the handout that you have, which explains on the back side, there's a timeline of Stewart Media Archive Center. And there it is right there. And so Business and Media Archives is something, as I mentioned, that came out of members of the history department and administration at Youngstown State University, members of Mr. Williamson's family, and also Mahoning Valley Historical Society. Planning started in earnest in 1994, and that's when the name came about, Business and Media Archives of Mahoning Valley. It was a separate nonprofit organization of which the Williamson family, YSU, and MVHS were partners or members of that organization. And it operated independently, first in spaces on campus here at YSU, and then moved downtown to rented space on East Federal Street. And then during this process of organizing the collection, you had Mr. Williamson, who lived a long, full life, very interesting character. He passed at the age of 96 in 1996. And so this project really became his legacy, first in supporting it financially, but also through his company, WKBN Broadcasting Corporation, transferring their vast collection of archival material, corporate records, family materials, everything related to their involvement in the broadcast industry, and then other more important things like radio, but especially television archives of film and videotape that they used through their news department. So this was all coming together in the mid-1990s. And then in 1999, by then the family had sold their radio and television properties, and then a very important new technology that they were into, cellular telephones, they sold that too, and started to disperse from the community. And in 1999, all the member organizations agreed to have a management agreement with Mahoning Valley Historical Society to actually continue to work on the collection and to operate it within the operating structure of our historical society. And so we took over that function in the late summer of 1999, and it continued like that until 2006, when the collection and the separate organization, Business and Media Archives, was dissolved, and the collection ownership was transferred to Mahoning Valley Historical Society. And so we have owned and operated and continue to develop the collection ever since. I mentioned Tyler History Center. This is important to the development of the collection in its current state, where we moved the Historical Society's archives from the carriage house behind our Armstrong Museum down to the new Tyler History Center, and opened in November of 2014. And after that began work to relocate the Business and Media Archives collection to that same building, which had the archival facilities in place, just needed to be upgraded and renovated a bit. And so that took place in the spring and summer of 2015, and we had a dedication in September of 2015 to open the carriage house as the new Business and Media Archives Center. And I mentioned Mr. Williamson, known as the boss among family, friends, and employees, was really the inspiration for this project. But his grandson, Lowry Stewart, along with his uncles, who were Mr. Williamson's sons, more than anybody really pushed all this and brought it to fruition. And unfortunately, he passed away in January of 2020, very unexpectedly. And so that changed the course a little bit for this collection. And I would like to go back to the slide presentation if we could. So, as you can see, there's an earlier image of Mr. Williamson. WKBN Broadcasting Corporation was formed on September 26, 1926. Actually, they had pulled the license before that, but the first broadcast on their frequency on the radio dial occurred September 26, 1926. They were not the first to pull a commercial broadcasting license. There were several beforehand in the 5 to 6 years prior to that, but either those license holders never formed and opened a station and broadcast it, or they did for a very short period of time. So what's significant here with WKBN is that it was the first successful commercial broadcasting organization here in the Mahoning Valley, starting in September 1926. They had a very interesting setup. The station was literally in the Williamson home. They used the living room as a studio where the MC, whoever was on, worked. All the transmitting equipment was up on the second floor in a sleeping porch on the back of the house, and there was an antenna that ran from the sleeping porch up over the garage where there was a mast, so that you had a good enough area for broadcasting out through the airspace. So that was interesting. This is how businesses start oftentimes, literally out of your living room. But soon they were able to set up a studio downtown at the YMCA building, which was still relatively new at that time, and had their antenna on top of the building. And by 1929, 1930, through an agreement, they became an affiliate of the Central Broadcasting System, or CBS, and one of the early affiliates of CBS. And Mr. Williamson and William S. Paley were good friends throughout their lifetime together, and they remained a CBS network and continue to this day. The television station, though the radio station has gone out of the CBS radio network. And but the family and the company were very meticulous in saving what they felt all along were the most important elements of their company's history and everything that they did. And so by the mid-1990s, they were aware of everything they had, and they, I'm sure, sensed that things were going to change dramatically in radio and television throughout that decade, and that's how they got involved with us and MVHS and the YSU in terms of creating an institution or doing something to make this collection that would preserve everything that they had held on to and cataloged so fastidiously. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of organization went on there. And so as this collection started coming out of WKBN Broadcasting Corporation, we started to classify it into various elements. And the next slide will give you a preview of what we're talking about here. And so the most significant parts of it are 2.5 million linear feet of 16mm news film that WKBN TV and their channel 27 news department shot over 1955, 1978. So imagine, if you will, every day they went out and did news stories, and you had a reporter and a photographer, and at the end of the day, they took those stories, edited them down, and then broadcast during the evening news these stories. And when that was over, they took those edited clips of film for each day and spliced them together and created a whole reel. And day in, day out, from 1955 to 1978, that's what they did with their news film. They didn't throw it away, they didn't wipe it, they saved it. They made the transition starting in 1977 to videotape, which they finally at that point had what you might call a portable way of shooting and recording videotape on news stories. And the one name, never ran name for it, was a minicam, which is kind of funny. You call it portable, but the camera weighed about 40 pounds, and you had a pack with a recording device on it, which was probably another 40 pounds. And I can only imagine how the photographers felt at the end of the day, having lugged that stuff around for the day. But it was still, like many broadcasters, that was the cutting edge of technology in the late 1970s. And so our collection, this Media Archives collection, goes up to 2000 as far as the film that was shot for news, for sports, some special features, which we're finding right now and mining into, which we're going to see some examples of that in a little bit. Other than that, we have more than 21,000 phonograph records. And this is how they play music every day on their radio stations. We have recorded air checks, which they would actually record local and network broadcast programs for FCC rules, and they put them on these 16-inch transcription discs, and all those programs are there waiting for us to get in and reformat them. So there's a lot we don't know about it, but this is the most important thing we're talking about. Thousands of photographs, corporate documents, all their interaction with the FCC, a lot of their marketing studies. We found some of that in the collection as well. And of course, some of the equipment there is very unique and will be very interesting in the future for people to try to understand how is it that they broadcast information over airwaves into people's radio and television sets. So that's really the core of the collection. And now it's a matter of just some shots of what it looks like. You know, they did a lot of print things, and this is a great example, probably in the late 1940s, of all of their radio personalities out of one of their program books. Next, please. And then, of course, in the 1950s and early 60s, when this photograph was taken, they're advertising their television news programs, and two of the early on-air personalities for news. And lots of interesting local history along the way. This is broadcasting on election day, and the gentleman to the left is Charles J. Kearns, who was the local congressman for a number of years. Actually, he succeeded Michael Kerwin in 1970 as congressman, and then served until I believe 1979. But here he's being interviewed on election day, and they're tabulating in the background there in the studio. And this is interesting because probably maybe 50 years earlier than that, one of the first things that WKBN Radio did was broadcast election results, which the Vindicator, this was before they were competitors, were actually phoning them the results of various precincts and candidates and the races that were going on in 1926, and they were broadcasting that over the radio. So very interesting, some of the ways that they were on a day-to-day basis aiding the community with that kind of information. And weather, of course, this is Ed Black, who I knew personally, and this is very early weather. Those are all just like velvet maps there, and they would actually stick the front lines and warm or the high pressure, low pressure, all those things on there on a daily basis to do the weather forecast. But they did it, and so it's interesting to see that progression going on. Now, I mentioned the connection between Mr. Williamson, Warren Williamson Jr., and his grandson Lowry. This past year, in honor of Lowry Stewart, we had a special rededication of the Business and Media Archives project. And this was in early August of 2021, behind Arms Family Museum, and members of Lowry's family, that's actually his wife, 2 daughters, son, and sister, were there to unveil the new brand for Business and Media Archives. And the whole family was in for their annual reunion and business meeting. And so we were all there to share that and to remember Lowry in that way. And just a peek in terms of what you would find what is now the Stewart Media Archive Center. And here you can see when you walk into the foyer, what you'll find, which is a tribute to Lowry Stewart, and also a little information about the building. It's an important historic artifact too. And once inside, you'll find exhibits in the large meeting room on the first floor. And then here you can see another perspective. I don't know if you remember that photograph of Mr. Williamson a few slides ago, but you can see that transmitter under the vitrine there. That is the transmitter from 1926, 7.5 watts. And that is literally the holy grail for the family, and in terms of what this collection means and how it all started. And so it always has a place of prominence, both when they operated studios, but also here at Business and Media Archives. And along with the exhibit in the meeting room, we have the reading room where our visitors can actually interact with the collection. And we are not so sophisticated yet that everything is digitized and in a huge, either on a cloud or a huge database where you can sit and pull things up. I mean, that's what the Paley Center is all about in New York in terms of the CBS broadcast archives. We're not there yet, but that's our goal, to be able to do that. But we can, with some advance notice, if somebody's looking for a specific topic within the news film and videotape collection, we can pull that out and put it on a playback, usually a DVD, so they can actually look at it here at this site, and any other research they would need to do with the collection that we can pull out on that particular day that happens in there. I don't have pictures of what storage looks like, but it looks like archive storage. Just the compact shelving with boxes and lots of cassette tape for the videotape boxes and other things that we're still in the process of going through. So, the real point in all this, you can hit the next one there. This is what you find on the Facebook page for Stewart Media Archives. And since we changed the brand last summer, but the real point of this and why I wanted to present this today is we, in local history and academically, and state and other historical organizations, the real focus of what we do is material culture. And that's the fancy word for it, material culture, that we collect and preserve and try to understand all these materials that people of the past have left us. Either they left it or the prehistoric people left it on the ground, but other people have left things along the way, or their descendants have brought them to us. And this, I think, is a key element of that. And if you look all over human history, it's how we really understand various cultures, whether it be cave paintings in the south of France and projectile points from prehistoric peoples to some of the artifacts that speak to the culture, the carvings of ancient civilizations, the Sanskrit tablets, to illuminated manuscripts, to religious artifacts, to, from the 15th century onward, printed words and documents. All of that leading up through the generations and centuries are the building blocks for how we build an understanding of what a culture did or what was important to people at that time, et cetera. And here we are with this collection, and I propose to you that is what's most significant about this collection, because it really not only encapsulates but reflects where we were in the 20th century as far as communication, which obviously we were still printing and reading books and still collecting documents and papers from organizations and companies and individuals, either handwritten or printed. But in terms of the popular understanding, in terms of how people more and more related to the world around them, radio and then television were key elements of that. And through this collection that was so meticulously preserved and is now part of Mahoning Valley Historical Society and really this community as an archives, we feel to our bones how important it is not only to preserve the collection, but also to bring it out in life, which here in the 21st century is primarily going to be digital in terms of the medium for understanding that medium of the 20th century. And so that's the point I wanted to make today. And I hope everybody understands that how important the news was to understand who we were in the 20th century. And I have one thank you slide left, but don't worry about that. Anyway, are there any questions at this point?
And we have a few observers online too. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat if you'd like, and I'd be happy to relay them to Bill.
Is there anything from the other stations around here? Mom?
Very good, thank you. Yes, we are not exclusive. Right, we are not exclusive to WKBN, and we have collected materials, both studio and broadcast equipment, but also bits and pieces, still photos, some tape and film from the other locals. Of course, WFMJ came on as a radio station in 1939. There were a few others in between KBN and WFMJ. And then WKBN and FMJ both almost had like a race to get on the air with television that culminated in January 1953. We have material related to both of those companies, plus WYTV, which was the ABC affiliate that started in Newcastle in 1960 and eventually moved to Youngstown. And a little bit on public broadcasting here in the region, and other radio stations. Of course, some of the more popular ones were WBBW and other yes, anything that relates to the broadcast industry or people who were involved with it, we are interested in adding to this collection that will broaden our understanding of the industry here in the Mahoning Valley. Broadcasting industry, that is. Yes.
Okay, so we're always looking for student projects.
Yes.
If one of our students, say senior, doing a senior project, or one of our master students came and said, you know, I'm really interested in news and media and, you know, the importance of them in community and how they shape community life. Could you give maybe 2 or 3 examples of projects we might send them to investigate?
Well, I think they would revolve in one case around significant news events that happen locally. The rise and fall of gun trafficking, these are popular ones.
Was one that I thought of in my head.
Lesser known, but I would argue more influential in 20th century politics was the career of Michael Kerwin. I mean, he, in his long almost 34-year career in Congress, wielded a great deal of power and used that to the benefit of his hometown and his constituents here in the Mahoning Valley, which he wasn't as colorful as Congressman Trapping was, but there is stories related to him, what he was doing. Of course, his great obsession in the 50s and early 60s was the canal, Kerwin's ditch, as it was often called, that he came pretty close, but couldn't get it through Congress because of resistance from other districts, but also the other party in terms of doing that. Actually, he talked about it in the 30s, and then after the war, he became more seriously interested in it. But it was 50s, early 60s when he was really pushing to get the studies done by the Army Corps of Engineers to put all the building blocks in place to actually have a canal built from Lake Erie to the Ohio River. And he almost made it, but he didn't. And so it never happened, other than some very preliminary studies. You can pick other subjects along the way, like the whole issue of the steel industry going down. Organized crime is a very popular one for this collection because there's a lot of stuff there from various generations, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 90s. There was frequent issues that came up, rivalries, battles between opposing factions, etc. So, but there are other ways to look at it in terms of more popular subjects like the Canfield Fair or local sports, and how that created an identity for communities, especially on their scholastic level.
Bill, we forgot about our YouTube clips. Maybe
Yes.
were there clips there that might come?
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I was totally off on that. I did bring a couple of examples that we pulled up that we'll show now in terms of some of the small features that we found along the way that really identify what was going on in various periods.
Do you want me to start at any particular one, or?
We can start with that one.
Okay.
But this is in the 1960s, and Home Savings and Loan Company was doing a major renovation of their building in downtown. And along the way, they completely rebuilt the clock tower that you see there. And here you have a view into the workings of that clock tower, and they're actually putting new faces in and new technology for operating the clocks. This WKBN reporter was right there while it was happening, and that's what the story reflects.
So this is film that's unedited.
Well, this is a collection, or this was a story that was put together during the renovations, and you can see all the work of the clock. Now, you have some bits that are have sound in them, and others where they would have done a voiceover in the studio. And this will have a little bit of both. And right at the end here, the reporter will be standing on top of the tower, explaining what's going on. There's a lovely view of Spring Common, and that's looking down the east towards East Federal Street and Central Square area.
WKBN News in downtown Youngstown.
With all the raindrops on the top. That must have been a setup, having him checking his watch. Yes.
I have it, 5 seconds, so.
And here's some outtakes of the same story. See, it's signal.
WKBN News in downtown Youngstown.
So you get to see some production values along the way too. Of course, you didn't have them in focus, but it's just very interesting how they put the whole thing together.
Are you rolling?
One more time.
You ready to go?
Great views around the city. As I said, these are all outtakes now. The original part of it was what was there, so his sign off.
Now, Bill, do you know, like, when that shot of the man on the sidewalk that was out of focus, would that videographer have had any idea whether or not he was in focus? What is he looking at? Just an eyepiece?
He's looking through his viewfinder. I'm sure they did more than one take just in
Yeah.
case they ran into that. He might not have known it was out of focus, or he had trouble hitting the focus point to get him into focus. But it's really how it works in terms of reporting for television. And it was a rainy day. He's having trouble with his light level. You can see the glare coming into the lens too.
It's a real technical question.
Sure.
For something like that, would it be possible? I mean, you've obviously digitized them to apply filters to get better focus.
Yes, we can improve on the original images with our current editing technology. Oh, you want to try another one? Okay, that's a good one. Yes. This is Nathaniel Jones, a local native here of Michael Kerwin, who appointed him to the federal circuit court in the 1960s. There's a lot of Youngstown politicos in these scenes right there, and he was sworn in, and then this is all part of there's Charles Henderson, who was a former mayor of Youngstown and later a Mahoning County probate court judge, and here he is again with Congressman Kerwin. And as I said, he grew up here in Youngstown, went to law school, and rose to be a jurist here in Ohio throughout the rest of his legal career, and was very well respected. And these people are all probably in the federal courtroom at the old post office on Front Street, I would imagine. Okay. Oh, and here we go. This is
Reagan finished off his business in
1980.
Youngstown early this morning. Around 9 o'clock, he left the
Welcome
Mahoning
to the Mahoning Valley Historical
and
Society's 2021 Historic Preservation Award.
and he spent the rest of the morning paying tribute to Youngstown shut down steel mills. First, the motorcade and a caravan of 3 press buses carrying nearly 150 members of the media drove through a portion of the camel works of Youngstown Sheet and Tube. Pro and anti-Reagan demonstrators were at the entrance of the mill. And one mill worker at the camel works had a few comments to make about Reagan's visit.
I think it's around time we saw how desolate it really has become.
Welcome to our first history. This summer's hands-on history day of our episode.
Certainly because of the administrations that make this area better than that.
Then, in a rather unorganized fashion, Reagan spared a few minutes to answer some questions from the press, calling the closed mill a ghost town.
And somehow in Washington,
He criticized the EPA's regulations.
required massive outlays of capital not to be for food steel production. The food steel production of the outlays that were demanded by government. With the EPA, certain requirements there. As a matter of fact, many of those things have been mandated to reduce steel production.
And he said he was in favor of community ownership of the mills, but against massive federal bailouts. Reagan took a look around, then climbed back in the motorcade for a private tour of the operating seamless hot mill. I say private because only network press were permitted to accompany the governor. No local media were invited on the hot tour. The motorcade left the mill and proceeded to the airport where Carter pickets booed the Republican candidate. Congressman Lyle Williams met twice with Reagan, once last night and again this morning. He announced his endorsement of Reagan and said that the governor had guts to come to Youngstown.
I think that may be the most important campaign plan as far as this process is concerned. You have not got to come to America. His president was very favorable because he indicated that he was going to listen to us. He didn't come up and try to come up with a magic formula to put people back to work. And we're going to do more. We don't need to do that again.
After the tour, Governor Reagan left from Youngstown Municipal Airport en route to Chicago. For News Watch 27, I'm Joanne Nader with the minicam at the airport.
so 41 years later. Those arguments all sound somewhat fresh. And the whole political discord that revolves around them. Again, this is just tidbits out of an enormous collection where you find things of that nature. And to go back to your question about student projects, I would also like to mention that through the generosity of the Williamson family, who have built up a memorial fund for the Mahoning Valley Historical Society to operate the Stewart Media Archive Center. This summer, we're going to be advertising for internship positions to work with the collection. And so we'll let the department know when we're ready to do that and get students interested. And these are obviously paid internships as well.
That would be great. And that's one of many more.
We currently have funding for 2.
Okay.
whether it's one per semester or both simultaneously, we can figure that out. But we are organizing some job description and projects in terms of what we want to try to plug students in, but we would like possibly some input from the department in terms of there's a technical part of it, there's the reformatting, there's really social media in terms of doing more to bring the collection out, since our current staff, which is two full-time people, can only do so much per week. And so we're looking at history students, but we can also look at other departments in terms of having some input
People, would you want to give this as a reward?
in terms of
You're hiring interns.
it would be a competitive process, we're imagining, yes.
Yeah, like now,
It wouldn't be like a scholarship. It wouldn't be like a scholarship. It would be, they have to do it. It would be an interview process.
Right. And we're looking at YSU students exclusively in terms of helping them with their own needs in terms of having an internship experience, et cetera.
I think we could probably supply that for the students.
Great.
Would Connie be their supervisor?
Connie Jones is the project manager, and then Chris Ratushin is the media specialist. So depending on where we're going with the project, they would both have some input on that.
That could be good. Absolutely.
Good. Anything from
Nothing from
students
the,
on Zoom?
nothing from the chat. Got a handful of students there, but I guess it just sort of leaves it to us to close things down. So I'll just hop back over and say thank you, everyone, for attending our hybrid event. Thank you especially to my students who I see joined us online. And in case it's a little bit difficult to hear what's been going on here in the room out in the internet world, let me just stress that Bill was just sharing that we can expect some internships to be available for students to work with this Stewart Media Archive. So stay tuned for that. Reach out to myself, Dr. Fluker, for questions, or to Bill at the Mahoning Valley Historical Society. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you so much for your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.